It's no secret that short-term rentals have had a major impact on our housing scenario by and large here in Rhode Island. It's a problem that we've seen really across the board on a global level. You start to see different countries handling this in different ways. Zooming back into Rhode Island, certainly, if you will, ground zero in the short-term rental conversation has been Aquidneck Island, where an enormous amount of housing stock has been converted into whether it's Airbnb or Vrbo based short-term rentals. And to try to get a handle on this and define the problem in real world terms and perhaps put forth recommendations for how to best address these challenges, a legislative commission has been formed, spearheaded by Representative Lauren Carlson. I read from a press release here that this special legislative commission to review and provide recommendations for policies that deal with numerous economic and social short-term rentals issues has been formulated, and that commission will begin its work today at 3 o'clock in the State House Lounge. Joining us this morning is Representative Lauren Carlson of Aquidneck Island. Thanks so much for your time, Rep.
Good morning, Bill. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure. So let's talk first of all your experience on the ground, what you've seen that has really defined this issue from your perspective in terms of short-term rentals. Something that on Aquidneck Island is, you can go back a very long time, and the for lack of a better term, the standard B&B, the bed and breakfast culture, it's been there forever. But as Airbnb and these other short-term rental platforms have come along, it really has transformed the housing market. Talk about what you've seen.
Well, interesting you should start there, Bill, because when I moved to Newport, I owned a bed and breakfast, and that was the reason I moved to Aquidneck Island from New Jersey 35 years ago.
Wow.
So I've been in the business. I understand what it's like to have guests make breakfast, do the advertising, direct them to the mansions. I know all that stuff, right? And I sold that property about 20 years ago. Well, you're completely accurate when you say that this phenomena of renting rooms has really taken over all over the world. You can look in any city, county, state, country, from here to Japan, and you will find that there was an explosion in these types of property businesses. And different industries have different parts, different governments have handled it differently, and we can speak about that later on. I mean, what I've seen, the biggest concern that I see from my constituents is that, there's dark houses in the winter because investors have come in. I mean, the industry started as I have an extra room. Isn't it kind of cool for me to rent it? And for me as the customer, I'm going to go into this room and stay in a house and pay less, and particularly flourished during COVID when we didn't really want to have a lot of exposure in large crowds. But the culture of the industry has changed, and it's really become a mega investment type of a real estate investment proposal. And so, when it started in Newport 8, 10, 12 years ago, I think people were tolerant of it, and they were used to the bed and breakfast industry, as you said. But then as larger tracts of property was being bought up, Lower Thames Street, 10 or 12 houses at a clip, it's reducing housing for year-round residents. It's reducing housing for students that go to Salve. It's reducing housing for folks that work in the tourism industry. That's been a huge problem if you ever talk to the Chamber of Commerce about this. And there's dark houses in the winter. And, the flip side of that also is that there's, you don't really know when a property is going to be turned into an Airbnb or a short-term rental. And then all of a sudden on your block, it's like there's different people every weekend. And you're like, what's going on over there? There's different cars. So it does disrupt neighborhoods in some ways. Property owners have a right to do with their property what they want. And I respect that. And we have to really be sure to honor that in this study commission. But on the other hand, we have to look at the impact of the way this industry has grown in the past 10 or 12 years so that everybody is a winner in this situation.
One of the big things that I found in some of the reporting that I've done, I did a long form piece for PBS several years ago where we actually did an investigation of short-term rentals, both those that are registered and unregistered, both those that promote through the standard platforms, Airbnb, Vrbo in particular, and those that are just sort of word of mouth. And just an incredible amount of housing stock, as you alluded to, has been purchased, and literally what may have been a multifamily home, a single family home, several apartments that are shared by, be it students or folks who work in the seasonal businesses and sailing or the arts or restaurants, all of a sudden there's nowhere for them to go. And this is part of a broader conversation in the housing crisis conversation that I think is in part driven by short-term rentals. But it's that balancing act of a property owner that wants to do whatever they would like to with their house, their multifamily house, whatever it is. But then at the same time, at what point does it become just a sort of an opinion question that you go, yeah, this is changing our city or our town or our state too much, and it's just the juice isn't worth the squeeze to protect the individual property owner's rights? How do you balance that?
Well, I'm not real sure about that yet. I think that there's a couple different things to say. One is that there's different type of property owners, and we haven't really looked at this question, at least in my conversations at the municipal and statewide level. We haven't really said, okay, there's the individual property owner that has the one room in their house. They're my age, maybe a little older. They rent the room maybe 4 or 5 months a year. It's offsetting their taxes. They're in the house. It's owner occupied. They're managing the situation. They're a responsible neighbor. That's one set of people. The other set of people, as I said, are these investors from out of state that come in and buy 10 houses on Lower Thames Street. And they don't live here, and they have a property manager. And, they're not, they don't know what's going on. And for example, there was an incident where somebody was killed on Lower Thames Street about 2 or 3 years ago. You may remember that. And the police get there and they don't know who owns the house. I mean, because it's, they don't know where the property manager is. And with my registration statewide that I set up, there's more access to that. And some municipalities have registration systems that give you access. But, at one time we had no access. Like, who lives here? What's going on here? So I think what I want to do, one of the things I want to do in the study commission, and this actually was a suggestion from Speaker Shikarchi, was to really look at those two different types of property owners and maybe take a path down there in terms of management and policy. I'm not sure yet how we're going to go. I think that what we're going to do today, the first session today, is we're going to hear from the Department of Business Regulation regarding the implementation of the state registration system, which, by the way, has some flaws. We can talk about that if you want. But what they will do today is they will come in and they will tell us how many properties are registered in each town. And then we'll know exactly how many year-round rentals were taken off the market. So if they come in and they say there's 452 registered in Newport, that means we have 452 less year-round housing units in the city of Newport. And that's going to be, I think, significant information today with
Absolutely.
respect to
So
the housing aspect.
no question about it. I mean, that data it'll help drive policy and sort of just everyone can wrap their hands around the issue from a more legitimate place rather than from an opining standpoint of, man, this seems like it's detracting from our housing stock. You mentioned that registration, that statewide registration. What are some of the achievements that you and your work and your colleagues' work have been able to put forth, and what are some of the problems or flaws, as you referenced, that the gaps that need to be
Well,
closed?
I wanted to create a statewide registration system, which is not uncommon. They're all over the world in cities, states, counties. And I worked on that for several years, and we did get it passed on an override because you may remember the governor vetoed it. So we had an
Yes.
override 2 years ago, I guess, or last year, and set it up. And so the Department of Business Regulation is responsible for that registration. One of the things that I wanted in the original legislation was a carrot and a stick. And that is, if you're not registered, an online website cannot advertise your property. And so the property owner would have to demonstrate to the website, either Airbnb, VRBO, and that whole group of people, that they were registered, and they'd have to do that annually. They'd have to demonstrate that annually. And at the time, Airbnb was fighting that policy. And in order to get the bill through, I did take that out. And so we really don't have a measure to make sure that properties are registered. Now, what I have learned is that in the city of Boston, Airbnb got into a big lawsuit with them. And the city, in the negotiations to settle the lawsuit, they did require mandatory registration. And if you're not registered, you're not being advertised. They also just passed a citywide ordinance in New York City, which is a very strong one. You might want to take a closer look at that. And they're doing the same thing. So I put in a bill this past session, and so did Representative Vella Wilkinson, that required a carrot and a stick. You want to be online, you got to register. I think that will really seal the deal to make sure the registration system is working. Because I'm guessing there's properties that aren't registered out there. I mean, it just sort of makes sense that that might be the way it's going out there. So I do want to, I will, I don't know what Representative Vella Wilkinson will do next session. I'll clearly work with her. If she wants to take the lead on that bill, I'm fine with that. But we really do need to make sure that the registration is working. Now, it was in the meantime, as I've said before, all over the world in this country, municipalities, counties, and states have created policies to deal with short-term rentals, as Block Island is doing. It's in today's Providence Journal. Another
Yes.
municipality in Rhode Island is looking at regulating these properties. And some municipalities have already set up municipal registration systems. When I started with that bill, it was my hope that if the state could put together a state registration system, the municipalities would not have to do it. I mean, it was my hope that it would save them money, it would save them effort and, staff to set up a municipal registration system. In the meantime, because that bill did not pass as quickly as we might have liked, and the issue was growing out of control, municipalities have set up registration systems. I would hope that once we really get this registration working better, I think it works fine now. We're going to make some improvements to it. Municipalities may be able to save some money and just use the statewide system.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
And
So
that's been a big back and forth of at least in conversation of who should regulate this. Is this a municipal issue or is this a statewide issue? And
that
kind of
is a
setting that
very
in
good
stone.
question. And I am spending a lot of time thinking about the answer to that question. I think that what we will do, the study commission will review the municipal ordinances. And I have most of them printed out. I just preparing to print out the proposed Block Island one. I'm hoping that the study commission will work with the League of Cities and Towns. They are on the study commission. And I'm thinking that we may need to spend one, if not two sessions, really looking at which towns have ordinances, how are they regulating them, what do they have in common, and really doing a review. And then the question, as you ask it, is what is the municipal authority and what is the statewide authority in this situation? And that needs to be defined more clearly. I think, and so that way we can have some kind of standardization across the state. That's what I would hope for. Now, one thing that we can have several things we can have statewide standardization on. We can have the registration be statewide standardized. We can have health and safety and fire be standardized, and we're going to look at those questions. And we can also have taxation standardized, and we'll look at that as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that Block Island piece, which is in today's Providence Journal. Some proposals include a 5-day minimum stay in 2 residential zones. There'd be a fee attached to it, parking plans required. And one thing that's very interesting is a local representative must be named. So that sort of attacks the problem of the, hey, I'm from, Wichita and I bought 17 houses on Block Island. I don't think anybody could buy 17 houses on Block Island, but let's hypothetically say someone did. You'd have to appoint that person who is essentially the point person on a local level. And I think that's critical. And you go back to that murder down there and that basically hotel chain that moved on to Thames Street. And that was it. I was on the ground that morning, 2 or 3 in the morning, whatever it was. And there was tremendous confusion from law enforcement and everybody involved. Whose place is this? What's happening here? And there ended up being this huge party and you had no accountability for at least those initial key moments.
That's correct. That's correct. So, so I think that I hear what you're saying about municipal versus state. And I'm in a conversation with the speaker about this. I should tell you, the speaker asked me to do this. I already have another study commission on aging policy in the state of Rhode Island, which was really sort of my sweetheart. I really wanted to work on something for aging Rhode Islanders. And the speaker asked me to take this on. And I said, Joe, I already have one study commission. You give me 2 study commissions? And he said, yeah, I am, as a matter of fact. And so I did it. And that's how I'm spending the next 6 months, at least, really digging in. I worked on them both all summer. My aging study commission met last week. It was a very successful meeting. Today is the first meeting of the short-term rental study commission. I'm going to be strong in this short-term rental study commission. I think that the aging one is more about policy and planning for aging Rhode Islanders. There's not a lot of conflict or politics around that. I think there's a lot of politics around this one. And as I characterize it, the debates have been on the ceiling when we've had legislation. We got to bring it down to the floor. And I'm going to be the disciplinarian parent in the room and I'm going to say that today, that, really understands both sides of the question, and we're going to try to figure out state's going to try to figure out how to lead on policy for short-term rentals. And so that's the goal.
There's always questions about teeth with these types of policies in terms of
Uh-huh.
who enforces them and how they're enforced. You referenced a few moments ago New York, which has employed significant regulation around Airbnb that has seen several Airbnbs and Verbos and other short-term rentals just go offline. And those are really, it's a really interesting discussion. In fact, we're going to have someone, a great journalist from New York, on the show here shortly, who's going to break down what's happening in New York and how we can apply it to Rhode Island, kind of in
Yeah, can you
detail.
let me know when that is or how I can see that? That would be really helpful.
Absolutely, I'll make
The
sure to get it.
New York ordinance it's kind of dense, and I started reading it, and I'm like, whoa, this is very complicated. So
Yes,
I'm not quite there yet on that. But they say 15,000 rentals are coming off the market in New York as a result of this ordinance.
that's right. And what's interesting is that there was actually an article in Gothamist, which is a product of
I have that.
WNYC.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that the black market Airbnbs are starting to flourish. So as you hyper regulate, and I don't say that in a condescending way or a negative way, but as you regulate a sector, the black market starts to flourish. So assuming that you take, let's say, the study commission puts forth recommendations, statewide or even municipal rules are implemented, who enforces that? And how do you make sure that people don't just say, well, I'm just not going to list it on Airbnb anymore. I'll put it on Facebook Marketplace and essentially have the same operation. In other words, there
That's
will
a good
always
question.
be people who are creative to try to get around this. What
Yeah,
sort
I
of,
don't know the answer to that yet. I really don't. I do think I do have respect for municipal authority. I mean, as you know, municipalities have tremendous amount of authority under home rule in the state of Rhode Island. And I do think municipalities are capable of taking care of themselves. It's been a tradition and it's been our policy for hundreds of years, right? So, that, as I said earlier, that's where I have to find the balance there. Like, what is the balance? What can the state regulate? And as I said, the things are really, you know, in a conversation that I had with the speaker just last night, we talked about this, and he thought that we could maybe set out a low bar of standards that we want to establish, and then municipalities can go higher. That was one idea.
hmm,
Um, Enforcement, that's a good question, and I think that. To some extent, it does come down to the municipality to enforce. It does come down to planning and zoning boards to some extent. In Newport, we have a part-time person that just goes out, and I don't know exactly what he does day to day, but he is hired to monitor all the regulations in place for short-term rentals. So it may take that kind of vigilance to really. But there was another article that I read, and I'm going to hand out today at the study commission about the fact that the short-term rental world has really changed because when it started, as I said, it was more a mom and pop industry, and now it's turned into like hotels on Lower Thames Street, which you just described. So it has changed a lot. The woman that wrote the article had stayed at an Airbnb in Vermont, and she had to clean it, and it was a very different environment than it was 12 years ago when we first started staying in them. So I think we have to put it in the context of where this industry has been, where it's now, and where it's going. And those are important parts of the dialogue.
absolutely. Representative Lauren Carlson out on Aquinic Island, a centerpiece of the discussion on short-term rentals and housing in general here in Rhode Island, and an excellent project and a study commission that begins this afternoon at the State House, and we will certainly keep on top of that as we have with this short-term rental challenge, really since Jump Street here on the show, because it's something that impacts a lot of people, and there's definitely free market property rights questions that come into play, but boy, does it impact the character and nature of our state when this thing has gone almost like spreading like wildfire, where and it's a marketplace that seems endless. It's not something that you would think there would be a natural cap of, okay, how much supply and demand is there? It seems like when you create an Airbnb, it is almost inevitably going to be full a lot of the time, at least in places like Newport, Narragansett, Warwick. Maybe not so much in Providence, where it's more driven by student, the parents
Well, it
of
is in
resident,
Providence. The
but
student
it's
thing
there.
is pretty strong. Yeah, the parent thing is pretty strong there. And, some conferences, they generally stay in the hotels, but it's pretty strong in Providence.
All right, Rep. Thanks so much for your time as
You're
always.
welcome, Bill. stay in touch with me on this, okay?
Absolutely. If you could
Okay.
just hang on 1 second,
Sure.
the way this works is it uploads the audio from your side, so